Did you need to give him something or?
Well, I just brought him something to take home and look at.
Are you trying to sell my house?
No, not yet.
Oh, and no.
I just want you to have some information that might help you.
Yeah, because we'll talk.
Or you unmute us or put us on national camera and et cetera, et cetera. I'm asking for prayer. Kelly's got 5 nieces in the house in Irvine, California. And the 2 oldest, Savannah, who's a sophomore, and Gabby, who's in 8th grade. Both of those girls were molested by their dad's dad.
Yeah.
It's probably been almost a couple of years now. And so by an appropriate person who's going to help her, because she is in a very, very bad place. So I appreciate your prayers.
That is one we can pray about.
And that's Gabby, I'm sorry,
Gabby,
and
8th grade, I think.
who else?
Well, Savannah's 2 years older. Both of those girls were molested, were abused, sexually abused by their years ago. And so Gabby is now in Children's Hospital of Orange County, has been admitted as of yesterday. And if I could just add one more little twist to this from yesterday, they have a cat, her name is Hazel, that has been with them for 17 years, maybe 17 plus. And the family, as in mom and dad, then the mom and dad underneath that, wouldn't let Hazel in the house. So yesterday, Savannah and Kelly went out to the garage, which of course is where they keep her for all this time. And Kelly said she could hardly get up and walk just a couple of steps. So finally, and this really irritates the heck out of Kelly, finally she called my other daughter Beverly. Beverly and her husband Angelo showed up. They all put Hazel in the car with Savannah, the oldest, the sophomore, to take them to the vet, and the dad of the girls, the 5 girls, well, I can't make that decision whether you take the cat to the vet, because it's not my cat. Oh, give me a break. Anyway, so they grabbed the cat, they took the cat to the vet, and they had to put the cat down.
Aww.
And this had to be the yes or no on a 15-year-old. She had to make that decision.
Aww.
She made the decision because she knew it was the best thing for Hazel, who had been suffering, because they said she had been sick for several years. And so
Lord have mercy.
it's enough to make you want to go punch somebody in the nose.
Yeah.
It's like how, if you don't want to take care of an animal correctly, then don't have it.
Oh, yeah. There's plenty of, yeah.
Yesterday was just absolutely crazy, and it just breaks my heart that Savannah had to make that decision by herself, because her father couldn't man up enough to say, you do what needs to be done.
Lord have mercy.
Sounds like the whole family really needs prayers.
Still a little crazy. Okay, I'm done.
That's okay. All right. You ready for this? Because this was an easy
This was
chapter.
good, this was a neat chapter.
Easy chapter, right?
No. Read it again.
So let's just talk real quick because this it's one of those things. It seemed like not as crazy different
It
as
was real easy to read.
yes. Oh, it's very easy to read.
Yeah.
So just as a review, because when we are going into the book of Joshua, all right. So what we're basically doing is we'll see Numbers and Deuteronomy here in a little bit because we've been spending so much time in Genesis. We touched Exodus and Leviticus, and now we're getting through the Pentateuch, all right, which is great. But just as a review of these three rebellions that we've sort of identified, that Heiser has identified, because these three rebellions come into play for the conquest. All right, and it sort of will make the conquest like, oh wow, this is different. So again, we had the fall in Genesis 3. We had the flood, but what preceded the flood was the sons of God and the daughters of men that led into the flood, which is Genesis 6. And then we get the Tower of Babel with the nations.
And look at how ripped those guys got in just a couple.
I'm telling you what. I was trying desperately to find a giant picture, and that's and okay, y'all. we gotta leave. Let's just move to the next slide. So we left last week the Israelites at Mount Sinai, where we got the law, we saw the angel of the Lord, we get the tabernacle being built. We went through all that tabernacle stuff that led to the temple that relates to us as believers. And so now what happens is they get up and they move, and they go to the edge of the promised land, and 12 spies are sent out. And then they come back. So we're going to watch the first video, and it's really setting up this idea of the conquest, because when you think of the book of Joshua, what are the things that you think about besides Jericho and marching around and all that?
I love that.
Oh no! Oh, absolutely. But when you think about the book of Joshua and you think about the conquest, what do you think about?
Didn't take any fighting.
Well, it took a lot of fight.
Oh, okay. Well,
They're thinking Jericho.
yes.
Okay.
Ignore what I just said.
Okay. So when you think of Joshua, you think of battles, right?
Yeah.
A lot of battles going on. Now, this group and this church, you probably don't get the criticism of, at least I've never heard it here, of, oh my gosh, they killed all the cities. They killed all the women in the, you get that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, when I started reading the Bible, I went, wow, he wanted them destroyed, and that's what he wanted those people to obey. Destroy them all. Their cattle, their sheep, their children.
Don't take any plunder.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't take anything as booty or whatever it is.
Yep. But they didn't do it to every city.
Yeah.
He only did it to
they killed the majority, which, if you've already come that far, there's only a few left. You might as well finish what God told you to do.
Well, we're going to get through that. So let's listen to this first video that sets up what we're going to see. Now, this is from the unseen realm, so he's going to tell you that, hey, this section takes 3 chapters. Well, welcome to our world. It always seems to take 3 chapters for what we do in one. So here you go.
part in the unseen realm and really the biblical story where we've made the wilderness journey, we've got the tabernacle, we've got the priesthood, we've got all this stuff, and we're knocking on the doorstep of Canaan, so it's time to talk about the conquest event. And I do that in chapters 23 through 25, again, in a way that you probably have never heard before. Because these 3 chapters, again, that deal with the conquest, really focus on, frankly, what the conquest focuses on. And what the conquest focuses on isn't merely, this is Yahweh's domain, now we're moving in here. But the wars that are associated with it have a specific rationale that is honestly really not caught by people, and even scholars in this respect. So I have named these 3 chapters Giant Problems, The Place of the Serpent, and Holy War. Because the conquest, I'm going to say this right up front, and it's going to sound very strange, but again, as we go through our summary, I think you'll catch the gist of it and really the coherence of it. But the conquest begins and ends with the descendants of the Nephilim, the giant clans. And that is factually what you will read. The whole attempt, again, to get into the land begins in Numbers 13. And that is where Israel fails and is sentenced to wander for 40 years. Well, why do they fail? Because they fear the Anakim, the giant clans. They go in and spy out the land, and that's the report the spies bring back. Hey, it's great. It's everything God said it was, but we have a problem. The Anakim are pretty much everywhere in the land. That's a bit of an exaggeration on my part, but they say the Anakim are there. They're just, they're scattered around here and there, the places we went. There's just no way that we can defeat them. And they fail. Only Joshua and Caleb say, what's the problem? And they have to turn around and wander for 40 years. Well, when they go into the land, and they have the wars of conquest that we're all familiar with, at the very end of the campaign, how does Joshua define victory? He says, there are no more Anakim in the land. That is not a coincidence. That is not an accident. There's a deliberate, distinct rationale for the conquest, and especially the killing of the conquest. Because a lot of atheists, will take the conquest and kind of say, oh, this is indiscriminate genocide, and oh, this is just horrible. How could you worship a God that does these sorts of things? They are missing entirely the rationale for what's going on. Joshua and the Israelites are not only given commands with Hebrew verbs of killing. There are lots of other verbs that are used in the conquest. Drive out, disperse, dispossess, that sort of thing, that don't involve killing. But when, believe it or not, it sounds kind of crazy, but it's true. And this is why I wrote Unseen Realm, because you can get this in there and frankly really nowhere else. But the verbs of killing are all employed in battles that occur in places where, not coincidentally, the Anakim are seen. Again, that is not by accident. So what I want to do in these 3 chapters, again, this is just only a summary, is I want to sort of reorient your thinking about the conquest, again, casting it the way the book of Joshua casts it, and the book of Numbers to some extent, and Deuteronomy 2 and 3, okay? Cast the conquest in the supernatural framework, the religious rationale that the Bible itself casts the conquest in. And I think, again, it's going to be something new for you, but it's really important to read the account the way an Israelite would have been thinking about it when they either experienced it or when they read it.
Yeah, I don't know why it cut off like that, but it did, even on the online. So
He did say almost towards the end that the battles occurred where the unseen were seen.
no, where the Anakin. Okay, yeah.
Oh, the Nephilim were seen.
Yes.
Okay.
So you got a couple of different words here that are all related.
Yeah.
Nephilim we get from Genesis 6, that where we get this little And the Nephilim were in the land before the flood and also after. They were giants in the land, men of renown. All right, that's after the sons of God come into the daughters of men. Okay, so now in the Bible you hear of a couple of different things. Rephahim are Nephilim. Anakim are Nephilim. The Anakim are descendants of the Nephilim. So you have these couple of terms that all relate to giants. All right. So Book of Joshua. All right.
Yeah, wait till that goes.
Book of Joshua. Really, we got to start before the Book of Joshua, but to lay the groundwork. And this was like the beginning of the chapter. The battles for the promised land were framed by two factors. All right? And they happen to be two of our three rebellions. Both deeply rooted in Israel's understanding of their world as not only the abode of humankind, but also the prize in an unseen spiritual war. So the two things are the Tower of Babel incident and then also the Nephilim. So we got these two things going on here. And guess what? We're going to bring in the serpent from Genesis 3 in the fall also. Why not, right?
Sure.
So here's the thing. Before we can get to the book of Joshua, we got to go through the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy in a brief overview first.
I
Go
can
ahead.
ask you to turn the volume up just a
Just
little
a bit?
bit.
Okay.
So that,
You can actually hear it?
well, I can hear most of it, but apparently that kind of slid right by.
Okay, no worries. So I'm doing the Bible Project videos, but the ones that are sort of really cool,
Yeah.
the newer ones. So the first thing is we got to look at Numbers, because what happens is we're going to start this entire journey where they run up and the spies go out into the land for 40 days and come back, because it all starts there. So you ready for your Numbers lesson for today? And by the way, I will ask one trivia question. In English, we call it the Book of Numbers, but that's not what it was called in the Jewish Bible. So whoever gets
We're
it,
going to learn that in here as we're listening.
maybe. Yeah, here we go.
The Book of
Good thing we have
Numbers
Google
gets
on
overlooked,
them.
partly because it has a really boring name.
Which is a shame. In the Hebrew tradition, the book's name is Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. And it's an epic travelogue about Israel's journey through the desert on their way to the land promised to Abraham.
Now, this pilgrimage should only take about 2 weeks on foot.
But instead, it takes them about 40 years.
That's crazy. It's practically half of someone's lifetime.
Yeah, it's a very long camping trip with lots of interesting stories, but let's remember it's most helpful to back up and start with how this book is designed.
Right.
So the book is broken up into 5 sections. There are 3 wilderness locations, broken up by 2 road trips that link all the pieces together.
The first wilderness section is
Pause it
Mount
for 1
Sinai,
second,
right here on the
and I'm
map.
sorry,
And then
could
in
you
the
turn
second
volume
section,
up
they
just a
travel
little
to a
more?
region called...
Hold on a second. What? You want me to turn the volume up more?
No, could you turn the volume up just a little more?
Okay.
They're pretty soft spoken.
Well, they're so hilarious. I'll bring it back just a little bit.
5 sections. There are 3 wilderness locations, broken up by 2 road trips that link all the pieces together.
The first wilderness section is Mount Sinai, right here on the map.
And then in the second section, they travel to a region called Paran.
A whole bunch of things happen here in the wilderness of Paran.
And then in this 4th section is Israel's road trip to Moab.
The book ends with a large section in the wilderness of Moab, right across the Jordan River from the Promised Land.
Now, through all of these sections, the storyline just flows like a gripping dramatic movie. Everything starts great, but then the trip goes horribly wrong, and it all ends with the final redemptive moment, the surprising act of God's grace.
So let's jump into the story. It all begins at the wilderness at Mount Sinai, and we've become really familiar with this mountain.
Yeah, if you remember, Israel came here after Egypt, and they formed a covenant with God here, got the 10 Commandments here, built the tabernacle here, and they've been at this mountain for 1 full year.
And now they take a census to number the people as they prepare to leave.
Right, and they're given these instructions for how to organize all those people in the camp. God's presence in the tabernacle, and then the tribe of Levi and the priests around it, and then the rest of the tribes around them. And this pattern, it's this visual symbol for how God's holiness is at the center of their existence as a people.
And they're told that when the cloud of God's presence moves, they're to pack up and travel with it.
Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant is carried by the Levites out in front, and then the tribe of Judah, and on and on. And this order is also a symbol for how God's holy presence is their leader and guide through the wilderness.
We begin the second section of the book with enthusiasm as they leave Mount Sinai and travel up to Paran. God's with them, everything's organized. This is going to be great.
But it's not great. After just 3 days on the road, the people are complaining about their hunger and thirst, and then even Moses' brother and sister start bad-mouthing him in front of all the people.
Not a great start. But now we're into the third section, the wilderness of Paran. This is where they send the 12 spies to scout out the promised land. 2 of those spies come back and they're really optimistic.
But the other 10 are freaked out, and they don't trust God, and they go around saying, we're going to get annihilated in there. And so they start a mutiny, and they try to appoint a new leader who's going to take all the people back to Egypt. And so basically, they are refusing to go into the promised land, and God honors their choice. He says that this generation is going to wander for 40 years and die in the wilderness, and only their kids will get to enter the promised land.
You know, this story here gets brought up many times in the Bible by different authors.
Yeah, and it always serves as a reminder that while God remains faithful to his people and his promises, he will honor their choices. He'll let them waste their whole lives if they choose to live in rebellion.
Okay, so the trip's been a disaster so far.
And it gets worse here in this fourth section as they're traveling to Moab. Even Moses has a moment of rebellion and is disqualified from entering the promised land. Then there's another rebellion among the people that results in this snake attack. And what makes all these rebellions even worse is that every step of the way, God has been providing. He's been offering forgiveness. He's been giving them food and water and this crazy stuff called manna.
Yeah, what is that stuff?
Yeah, no idea. But in spite of all this, they keep complaining, and they say that they wish they had died in slavery in Egypt.
If I was God, I would just give up on these guys.
You would think. But that's what makes this story in the final section so surprising. Israel has just arrived in Moab, and the king of Moab, he's freaked out that this huge group of people is traveling through his land. So he hires this pagan sorcerer named Balaam to pronounce curses on them.
This guy means business.
Yeah, and so Balaam, he says, okay, I'm going to pray to the Hebrew God, and let's see what happens. And 3 different times he attempts to curse them, but each time he finds that he can utter only blessing. Most surprising is the last blessing, where he prophesies that out of Israel will rise a victorious king. And this king is somehow going to be connected to God's promise to Abraham to bless all nations through this family. So here's Israel rebelling down in the camp, totally unaware that up in the hills, God is protecting and even blessing them.
The book ends here in Moab. Israel's getting ready to go into the promised land. They count up everyone again, just like at the beginning. They're leaving the old generation behind, including Moses.
But before they leave Moses, he gives them his last words of warning and wisdom. And that speech is what the next book, Deuteronomy, is all about.
Pretty cool, huh? So that makes you almost want to go back and read the book of Numbers, doesn't it?
Yeah.
See, to me, you got Exodus and Numbers, which are like one big, beautiful narrative story. But we got to put Leviticus in the middle of that because they can't go into the Holy of Holies because they already messed up before, really before they even got the laws, which is crazy. So let's go on to the story. Did you notice the supernatural part of the whole story? I mean, it's like laid out there the whole time. God's taking them through the wilderness, and that is the angel of the Lord that's taking them through in a pillar of cloud through the wilderness. And they're complaining the whole way. It's like taking a road trip with 3-year-olds, okay? And these...
Only millions of
3 years. And you have to understand, they sat there. Okay, first of all, they saw everything that happened in Egypt. Then they saw the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea, which I'm sorry, was probably a pretty darn big event. You know, like if I'm walking through, if Lake Travis at its deepest spot just opened up and you walk through, you'd probably get shot on the other side, but hey, that's okay. But I mean, they saw all this. Then they saw Mount Sinai where the presence of God came down, and they're still complaining. They're still complaining. So, to give us a geographic little location of where we're at. So they come and they end up at Kadesh Barnea, all right? And what happens is they sort of come and they camp up here, and the 12 spies basically take 40 days to go through the land. So the orange line there is the spies, all right? So they spend 40 days, they go up to the hill country, they come back down, and they give the report. These guys are idiots. Because here's the report, okay? And this is Numbers 13, 25 through 33. All right, so I'll read it for you. When they returned, the spies, from spying out the land, at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruits of the land. Thus they told them and said, "We went to the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." I mean, we're talking some serious wine here. Now, watch the yellow words up on the screen, or you can grab them there. Nevertheless, the people who lived in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Achan there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses. So you can just imagine, you got these 10 people going, "Oh my gosh, there's big giants out there," and said, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it." But the men who were gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us." So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone in spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw there are men of" what? Great size. They were there also we saw the what? Nephilim, the sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. So we got the Nephilim.
You know, I can't help when I'm hearing this and rereading this, that we're no different today, given some circumstance that comes my way, and I immediately think maybe that there's just no way out of this.
Yeah.
And yet, my first thought, it should always be, and most of the time it is, but sometimes it's not, because I just can't see it. And so it's like, oh, woe is me. How am I supposed to get out of this? Well, I'm not going to get out of it, but he can get me through it, around it, whatever. I mean, it's...
Yeah, we all have our giants that we face.
Yeah.
Now, these are literal ones. I mean, these are literal ones. Now, we'll show. I have a picture in here of the size, and you know, there's great debate on the size of the giants. Okay, because we get in our Bible a certain size. The Septuagint gives a different size. Not to get to the Septuagint is the Greek version of the Hebrew Old Testament. But then you get the Masoretic text, which is the older version of the Hebrew Bible, which sometimes doesn't match the Septuagint, and then you get the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there's a bit of this wandering of how big is it, because the cubits that they talk about put these people like 9 feet, okay? And that's big.
Before you go on,
Mhm.
are they going to be similar to David and Goliath?
Oh,
Goliath is.
Was it
Goliath,
Goliath?
is an Anakim,
Okay.
which is what?
And
At Nephilim. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we get this idea that they go in, they spy out the land. It's beautiful, but they're scared because of the giants. Where did the giants come from? Genesis 6.
the supernatural.
Yes. So the Lord's ticked off. I mean, there's no other way to say it. He basically, we were in chapter 13. Next chapter, the Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people spurn me? And how long will they not believe in me despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst? I will smite them with pestilence." And guess what? You know what happened? We actually learned the names of all 12 of the spies. Do you know what happened to the other 10?
They didn't get to Canaan.
Not only did they not get to Canaan, they didn't get to chapter 14. All right, they were struck down by pestilence and died right away. And dispose of them, and I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they. So we get this idea that, good night. God's like, that's it. All right, and he goes on to say, you're not going into the land.
Yeah.
And I loved how they ended the video that says, God's going to let you make your choice. He's going to keep his promise, but if you don't want to obey, especially on a conditional promise like this was, that's fine. I'm not going to force you to. Go ahead, live in disobedience, see how that turns out. And it's the same today. Jesus came to save all. But what he says to Nicodemus is, you have to believe. If you don't want to believe, that's okay. It's going to sadden the Lord, but that's okay. That's your decision. It's not going to end well for you. So they wander. So let's get back to this story. They wander, okay? And keep this map in mind, because I know you don't remember. We're on chapter 9, but I'm going to show you a slide from chapter 1, somewhere along the line. I don't remember when, but I'm going to show you a slide from that. So what happens is they start to wander. All right, they go back basically to where they came, because let's see if I can push this up here. Yeah, so some people will tell you that Mount Sinai is down here, okay? Some people will tell you that the Red Sea was here. Probably, though, Mount Sinai was here, down in Midian, because that's where Moses was when he saw the burning bush. This whole thing is called the Sinai Peninsula, okay? And if you watch Patterns of Evidence, where they talk about the Red Sea crossing, they sort of think it was here. All right? So they could have been wandering anywhere. I mean, they could be wandering anywhere. But they got to here, and they almost go back to where they started. So if Sinai's down here in the Midian section, then they're almost going back to where they started, and they just start to wander. But what happens is they're going to end up here, and this is all called the Transjordan, okay, because the Jordan River goes straight up here, and this side is the Transjordan, okay? And they're going to end up here, and we'll talk about that eventually. Makes sense geographically wise? Guys, Jerusalem is right here. That's Jerusalem. That's how close they were. They're there. They are right there. This is a 45-minute plane ride today from Cairo, Egypt to Jerusalem or to Tel Aviv. It's like 45 minutes. It does not take them 40 years to get there. Crazy. So, we get a second chance, and this is right out of the book, okay? So I'm gonna read it, but you can look at it right out of the book. Israel would get a second chance at taking the promised land. So what you've got is 40 years of wandering. And now they're going to end up having to do a couple of little practice runs until Moses sits there on the other side of the Jordan from Jericho. All right? But Deuteronomy 2 and 3 basically chronicles how during the 40 years of wandering, the Israelites wound up in the territory on the other side of the Jordan River called the Transjordan to the east of the Promised Land. The Transjordan land was Edom, Moab, and the Amorite territory. Do you know who Edom is? Esau. It's the descendants of Esau. Do you know who Moab is? The descendants of Lot. All right? Amorans, I should know that, but I don't remember off the top of my head who they are. But the big thing is the Edomites and the Moabites, these are Abraham's family. Okay? These are cousins to the Israelites.
Okay.
All right? And so Edom and Moab let them cross their land while they're traveling. The Ammonites did not. All right, the Ammon did not. All right, so God has given the descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew, and Esau, Jacob's brother, and basically the people lived there were relatives for the most part. So then you get this idea, and this is the part. All right, this is absolutely, utterly crazy when we put all this together. Because who are they having to drive? Or who are they afraid to go into the land? They're afraid because of the Nephilim. All right, so God has directed Moses to take a specific trip for a specific purpose. He wanted them to not to just go through the wilderness to meet their brothers and sisters from Lot's family and from Esau's family. But he had them go to this place called Bashan. Now, stop in the story for just a second. Bashan is known as the place of the serpent. Now, pull your Bible up to Psalm 22. Psalm 22 is basically David's writing this, but you believe that this is Jesus talking from the cross, seeing this, because it says, "Oh, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Somebody read verses 11 and 12.
Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Many bulls surround me, strong bulls of Bashan encircle me.
Where are they going? Bashan. What is Bashan?
Serpent.
The place of the serpent. There's two major cities, Asheroth and Edrei, which both are mentioned, and I'm going to show you a map here in a second. This in basically different non-biblical sources, but sources from the Dead Sea Scrolls, I believe, and also from the Uritic texts, tell us the story of Bashan being the place where the sons of God that fell in Genesis 6, where their abode is, which is in Bashan, which is known as the place of the serpent, which is also known as the gates of hell. So there's the map again. Okay, so Bashan, you can see it up in this area right here. You good with that? Okay, because this is the slide from the first lesson. Caesarea Philippi, the rock of Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus tells Peter, "I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth should be loosed in heaven. Wow, why do we care about that?
Because they're one and the same.
They're one in the same. So, Genesis 6 talks about the sons of God who fell, basically, they were angels that came down to earth, and basically, 1 Peter and Jude talk about these angels that didn't find their place, that ended up dying and going into Tartarus, which is basically hell, okay, to be put in utter darkness until the day of the Lord. Jesus is sitting, and this is where they say that those sons of God came to. This was their abode, Bashan. They say it's
This
the
is
name.
what we might call the vortex.
Yes, the serpent, the home of the serpent, the gates of hell, and Jesus says that to Peter at that spot, and this is where the angel of the Lord sends the Israelites. He sends them through Moab, sends them through Edom, sends them through the Anakites to go and kill two kingdoms. All right? So they go and encounter two kings, Cheyenne and Og. Why is this important? These two kings were from the Amorites, and the rulers of the Bible call them Rephahim. Rephahim is another name for Nephilim. And basically, they're getting a practice run at destroying giants. Because they're doing this before they're going to go into the land. This is basically right before they go into the land. So basically, God is giving them a practice run at taking out the Nephilim.
So he's letting them see that they can do this.
That's right. Here is the little view. So this is a 6-foot human. Now, the average height of a Israelite was 5'2". That's what they think David was about 5'2". An Amorite was about 9 foot. Goliath was 10 foot. Og of Bashan, probably 12. That's what they think. And then Nephilim, Rephahim, up to 15 foot tall. Now again, you got to take that with a bit of a grain of salt because there's a lot of translation issues that go there. But I sort of lean on the fact that I think they're big. You know what I mean?
3 times the size of
Like-
a Jewish person.
Yeah. So some people will sit there and say, oh, they were only about 6'8", maybe 7 foot tall. Okay, that's a big difference from 5 foot to that.
Yeah.
But if I'm a warrior, I'm not, that doesn't bother me. 12 foot, I'm a little worried. All right. I think they were
kidding.
big.
I would be start worrying about 9 feet. I wouldn't even wait till they become.
Now I want to keep in the back of your mind because I may play this video at the end. I may not because I doubt I will because it's too long.
Oh.
But why are there still giants now? Because back in Genesis 6, we had a flood. How do we still have giants?
Because they're supernatural.
Well, we'll find out. So, yeah, we'll find out. So basically, this is a foretaste of the battle to come. So I have no idea what this next video is. So we're just going to push it and see what it is. I'll probably know as soon as it starts.
The Book of
Deuteronomy.
Conclusion to the Torah, and spoiler alert, Moses is going to die. Now, in order to understand this book, we need to remember the story so far.
So Israel has escaped from slavery in Egypt. Then they spent 1 year at Mount Sinai.
This is where they made the covenant with God to obey all of these laws.
Then they wander around the desert for 40 years before they make it to the Jordan River, which is right across from the land God promised them. They're ready to go in, This is where the book of Deuteronomy begins.
And what this book is really is a speech. Moses gives these final words, it's like a pep talk to the new generation of Israel that's about to go into the land. And the speech, it's broken up into 3 large sections.
So Moses begins the first part of the speech with a somber tone because he's highlighting Israel's rebellion and resistance, which has been going on for the last 40 years.
And that sets up the rest of this opening section, which is Moses' challenge to this new generation to be different from their parents and to respond to God's grace with love and obedience. So he reminds them of the 10 Commandments, like the basics of the covenant, and then he gives them this very famous line.
Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength.
Now, in Jewish tradition, this is called the Shema, because the first Hebrew word in this line is Shema Yisrael. And this became a very important prayer in Judaism, said twice a day. And it emphasizes the Israelites' exclusive commitment to their God, the one true God who loved them and who rescued them from slavery.
Right, because they're about to go into a land where people are worshiping many other gods.
And Moses thinks that loyalty to the Lord their God is the only way to life. Now, notice these key words in the Shema, listen and love. You're going to find these words all over this opening section of the speech. The word listen in Hebrew means more than just let sound waves come into your ears. It includes the idea of responding to what you hear. So for Israel, this means responding to God's grace by obeying the laws of the covenant.
And then listen is always followed by love.
Yeah, so love is the true motivation for obeying the laws. Israel won't obey without love, and they don't truly love if they don't obey. So there's this tight connection between loving and listening that runs through the entire book. And so Moses tells them that if they do listen and love, they will fulfill their original calling as the family of Abraham, to show all of the nations the wisdom and justice of God, and so become a blessing to them.
The second big section in Deuteronomy is a large block of laws and commands.
And this is where the book gets its name. Deuteronomy means a second law. And it's because many of these laws we've heard before. In fact, in the first line of the book, we're told that Moses is here explaining or clarifying the laws. So he's repeating and expanding on the laws, making them relevant to this new generation.
There's laws about how Israel's to worship God, laws about their leadership structure, laws about social justice, and then some more laws about their worship.
Now, after all of the laws, Moses warns Israel of the consequences of their obedience or disobedience, or in his words, the blessing or the curse. If they listen and love, they will experience blessing and abundance in the land, and if they don't, there's going to be famine and plagues, and they'll be forced off their land into exile.
And that brings us to the final section of his speech.
Yeah, here Moses says, I set before you today life or death, blessing or curse. So choose life. But then things get really interesting, because after 40 years with these people, Moses knows they're not going to obey, and so he predicts their failure and even their future exile from the Promised Land. And he focuses on what he thinks is the true source of the problem, that they have hard and selfish hearts. It's as if Israel is incapable of truly loving God in a way that brings about obedience.
But this problem isn't unique to Israel.
Yeah, in fact, Moses, when he's using this language about blessing and curse, he's tying Israel's story all the way back to all humanity's story from Genesis 1 through 3.
So Adam and Eve, they were blessed by God, just like Israel, and given a choice to trust and obey God, like Israel.
And then they rebelled and brought a curse on the land, like Moses knows Israel is going to do. And so these stories, they're about Israel's hard heart, but they're actually a window into the universal human condition.
But Moses doesn't give up hope entirely.
That's right. He says that somehow, on the other side of Israel's exile, God promises to transform their heart so that one day they truly can listen and love.
In the final chapters, Joshua is appointed as the new leader of Israel.
And then Moses takes the entire law code,
The one he just predicted Israel would break.
that's right, and he puts it into the Ark of the Covenant. And then Moses hikes up to the top of a mountain so he can see the Promised Land from afar, and then he dies. And that's how the Torah ends.
Which is a strange place to end the story. I mean, it's right there at the climax. Will they obey the laws and live faithfully in the land or not?
Well, the story does continue right into Joshua, the next book of the Bible, but this is the end of the Torah, and it's been ended here for a reason. The Torah is written for people who are either outside of the land or who are still waiting for the fulfillment of God's promise to bless the whole world. And so now, as each generation reads the Torah, they find themselves called to hope in what Moses hoped for, a new, transformed heart that one day can truly listen and love.
Hey guys, with this video, the Torah series is complete.
You don't know hear that, guys. I thought I trimmed that video. Pretty interesting, isn't it? Now, word of yeah, I'll give you this word. Most scholars believe that the Torah and 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles were all put in their final form either right after the book, right after the exile of Babylon, or just towards while they were in Babylon. But you get this idea, though, that Moses knew exactly what was going to happen. That the whole story that we've gone through right now, which started in the Garden of Eden, which we're getting to the Nephilim part, but we're getting to the nation part, which is what the Jews are supposed to bring back the nations to God. It all ties in together just totally beautifully. So Moses is sitting here. So he's sitting here. And Jericho's right here. And Jerusalem's just right here. Just right there. And we get Moses' death. And what's interesting is Moses climbs up to the mountain, he dies, and then we find out later that Michael and Satan, and we'll call him Satan, not the Satan, you've written down that thing before, fight over the body of Moses. So that's going to come up later too. So Moses dies. It's Joshua's ball game now, and they're going across the way. And all three of these are coming into focus now, because they're going into the land to take out the Nephilim. And their purpose is to bring back the nations to God. So, we're going to watch one more. Well, actually, a couple more. Two more. Maybe three. One more thing. But this is the book. This is the Bible Project's book video on Joshua. And I want you to pay close attention while you're listening to this to the lack of talk about the supernatural. Because what they're going to give you in this video, which is very, very good, lacks the supernatural component to what they were supposed to do and what they were told to do with the Nephilim. So what you're going to get here, and the reason I point it out is because this is what you're going to get in church. This is what you're going to get in a Bible study. It's this lack of the supernatural purpose for the conquest. Make sense? Okay, here we go. I love their videos. They do such a good job.
The book of Joshua. Let's back up and remember the story so far. So God chose Abraham, and then his family became the people of Israel, who are then enslaved down in Egypt. And so through Moses, God rescued Israel out of Egypt. He made a covenant with them at Mount Sinai, and he brought them through the wilderness. So Israel then camped outside the promised land, and Moses called them to obey God's commands so that they could show all the other nations what God is like. The book of Joshua picks up right after Moses has died and Israel's ready to enter the land. So the story of Joshua is designed with four main movements. Joshua first leads Israel into the promised land, and then once they're there, they meet all this hostility from the Canaanites, and so they engage them in battle. Then after their victories, Joshua divides up the promised land as the inheritance for the 12 tribes, and then the book concludes with these final speeches that Joshua gives to the people. So let's dive in and we'll see how all of it flows together. The first section begins with Moses' death, and Joshua is appointed as Israel's new leader. And the author intentionally presents Joshua as a new Moses. So like Moses, Joshua calls the people to obey the Torah, which means the covenant commands that they were given at Mount Sinai. And then Joshua sends spies into the land, just as Moses did back in Numbers chapters 13 and 14, except it goes way better this time. In fact, even some Canaanites turn and follow the God of Israel. Joshua then leads all Israel across the Jordan River and into the land. Just like the sea parted for Moses in the Exodus, so here the river Jordan parts and the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant across, leading all Israel with them. Now, in chapter 5, the story transitions. So the people look back to their roots as God's covenant people, and so the new generation is circumcised and they celebrate their first Passover in the land. But then they turn and prepare to go forward. And Joshua has this crazy encounter with a mysterious warrior, who, it turns out, is the angelic commander of God's army. And Joshua asks, "Are you for us, or are you for our enemies?" And the warrior responds, "Neither," which shows that the real question here is whether Joshua is on God's side. It makes clear that this whole story is not about Israel versus the Canaanites. Rather, this is God's battle, and Israel is going to play the role of spectators or sometimes supporters in God's plan, which leads to the next section. We find stories about all these conflicts that Israel had with different Canaanite groups. And the first part retells the story of 2 battles in detail, and that's followed by a series of short stories that condense years of battles into a few brief summaries. So the first 2 battles are against Jericho and then Ai, and they offer these contrasting portraits of God's faithfulness versus Israel's failure. At Jericho, Israel is to take a completely passive approach. So they let God's presence in the ark lead them around the city to music for 6 days. And just like Rahab turned to the God of Israel, maybe the people of Jericho would do the same, but they don't. And so on the 7th day, the priests blow the trumpets and the walls come falling down, leading Israel to victory. The point of the story is that God is the one who will deliver his people. Israel simply needs to trust and wait. Now the next story of the battle at Ai makes the opposite point. So there's this Israelite named Achan, and he steals from Jericho some of the devoted goods that were to belong to God alone, and then he lies about it. It's a pretty lame move after all that God has done for Israel. And so Israel goes into battle with the city of Ai, and they're totally defeated. And it's only after humble repentance and severely dealing with Achan's sin that Israel gains victory. And so together, these 2 stories, they're placed right up front to make an important point. If Israel is going to inherit the land, they have to be obedient and trust in God's commands. They don't get special treatment. Now the second part of this section begins with the Gibeonites, a Canaanite people group, and they do just what Rahab did as they turn to follow the God of Israel and they make peace with Israel. This is in contrast to all of these other Canaanite kings who start to form alliances and coalitions, and they want to destroy Israel. So Israel engages them in battle, and they win by a landslide. And so this whole section concludes with this summary list of all of these victories won by Moses and then by Joshua. Now, let's stop for a second, because odds are that these stories and the violence in them, they're going to bother you. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you're bound to wonder, like, didn't Jesus say to love your enemies? Why is God declaring war here? So first, why the Canaanites? The main reasons are actually given earlier in the biblical story. It's that the culture of the Canaanites had become extremely morally corrupt, especially when it comes to sex. Go check out Leviticus chapter 18. And they also widely practiced child sacrifice. Go see Deuteronomy chapter 12. And so God didn't want these practices to influence Israel. The Canaanites had to go. Which raises the second question. Did God actually command the destruction of all the Canaanites, like a genocide? So at first glance, you look at the phrases used in these stories. They totally destroyed them. They left no survivor or anything that breathed. But when you look a second time more closely, you'll see that these phrases are clearly hyperbole and not literal. So go back to the original command about the Canaanites in Deuteronomy chapter 7. Israel is first told to drive out the Canaanites, but then to totally destroy them. And then that's followed by commands to not intermarry with them or enter into business deals with them. So you can't marry someone that you've destroyed. I think you get the point. The same idea applies to the stories in Joshua. Look closely. So for example, we're told in Joshua chapter 10 that Israel left no survivors in the cities of Hebron or Debir. But then later in chapter 15, we see these towns and they're still populated by Canaanites. And so what we're seeing is that Joshua fits in with other ancient battle accounts by using non-literal hyperbolic language as part of the narrative style. And so the word genocide doesn't actually fit what we see here, especially in light of the stories about the Canaanites who did turn to the God of Israel, like Rahab or the Gibeonites. God was open to those who would turn to him. The last thing to think about is that these stories mark a unique moment in Israel's history. These battles were limited to the handful of people groups living in the land of Canaan. With all other nations, Israel was commanded by God to pursue peace. Go read Deuteronomy chapter 20. And so the purpose of these battle stories was never to tell you, the reader, to go commit violence in God's name. Rather, they show God bringing his justice on human evil at a unique moment in history and how he delivered Israel from being annihilated by the Canaanites. Now, let's go back to the book's design. After years of battles, we see an aging Joshua, and he starts dividing up the land for the 12 tribes of Israel. And most of this section is like lists of boundary lines. And let's be honest, it's kind of boring. It's like reading a map that has no pictures. But for the Israelites, these lists were super important. This was the fulfillment of God's ancient promises to Abraham, that his descendants would inherit the promised land. And so now it was all coming to pass right down to the detail, which leads to the final section. Joshua gives two speeches to the people that are very similar to the final speeches of Moses in Deuteronomy. Joshua reminds them of God's generosity, how he brought them into the land and rescued them from the Canaanites. And so he calls them to turn away from the Canaanite gods and be faithful to the covenant they made. If they do, it will lead to life and blessing in the land. But if they're unfaithful, Israel will call down on itself the same divine judgment that the Canaanites experienced. They'll be kicked off the land into exile. And so Joshua leaves Israel with a choice. What is Israel going to do? That's the big question that looms as the story ends, and that's the book of Joshua.
Wow.
So you get what I'm saying. He tries to explain away the supernatural part of it. And you know what? That's what most people do. Because we can't grasp this idea of giants. That's a little hard for us. And we certainly can't take that giants and go back to Genesis 6 and put together sons of God coming into daughters of men. That's where our culture is like, yeah, I can't figure that one out, so let's just say it's all hyperbole. And some of it is. I mean, in all honesty, there is hyperbole in there when they say he totally destroyed, a city, yet there were some people left of that city. We get that. So, but the idea is we have still to take the text for what the text says. An unseen spiritual war going on, all right? And I put these maps up here because, again, when there were cities that had Nephilim, Anakim in them, they were told to totally destroy it, and they totally destroyed it, all right? Now, did some giants, some Nephilim get away? Yes, because we know that there's still some left, okay? But you had the southern conquest that happened first. Those cities that didn't have giants, they just took over the cities, and a lot of times you find out that they either made peace or those people got assumed into the culture as workers. We won't go too far into that. once he got done with the southern conquest, we went up to the northern conquest in the hill country. Great story of Caleb, who basically is 80-some years old and says, you know what, I'm as young as I was 40 years ago when we saw this land before Moses said I could have it. Let me go take care of the rest of the giants that are up in the hill country. And he did. Great story. We won't go there. So let's listen to this video. And really, well, first of all, before we listen to that video, questions, comments, concerns. Is this more than you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, it's a little more than what I read in the chapter.
Yeah,
but that's good because we need more. Or we can sit down and read chapters 23 or 25.
23. Trust me, I did. I mean, it makes the conquest. Again, I think when we teach the Bible in Sunday school and in the pulpit, it is really, really hard to think of the supernatural, the unseen realm, because that's weird. Okay, that's totally weird. So when we teach these stories, we love Jericho, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And we love that story.
Yeah.
But then we get, after we get past Jericho, you know, IE is pretty interesting. I mean, it's actually really interesting from a military standpoint of what he did. Basically, they went and attacked and without the Lord with them, got knocked down, and then they found out what happened, and then the Lord said, okay, split your forces. So half of them went around to the other side, and then Joshua led them up to the point, and then they all came after Joshua. Then they came up, burned the city down, and then they came over. And I mean, it's insanely cool military stuff. I mean, but then you get the rest of the conquest, you know, and we hear the giants in there all the time, and we just pass by it. I mean,
it's not just that I think we pass by it. However, speaking for me, it's important that you get someone in front of you that can take what happened at the beginning here and the many pieces that tie it together, that give it the picture we actually need to see and understand. Otherwise, you're just reading, and most of us, or many of us, or me, don't have that ability to tie in exactly what this means from back here to here. To Joshua.
Well, I mean, and that, like I said, when I first started reading the Unseen Realm, it was just like, whoa, you know what I mean? Because things started to fall into place. Because, you know, when you think of the three divine rebellions, well, we never thought of it as three different rebellions that happened. We thought of it as the fall, and then everything that was it. But you know, when this idea of the Nephilim makes so much more sense, and also the idea that dead Nephilim or dead Rephahim become demons, and when Jesus comes, and he is the first one that basically gets demons that are possessed into people and gets them out. That's a big deal because
you just said that the dead Nephilim become demons.
So this is where it gets a little crazy.
That's the first time you have said that.
Oh, I hope not. Peter talks about the angels that basically left their position and were put into Tartarus, which I'm not going to go too much into that because I could confuse things a little bit, but they're held in utter darkness in chains until the end of time. That was before the flood. Well, obviously there's demons there's Nephilim afterwards. When they die, they become demons. And
therefore, they only, I'll use this word very simplistically, they can only cause problems if they go into a human body in order to affect those things that they want done.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I have a question.
Okay.
Are Nephilim still here today?
Oh, conspiracy theories have, there's a lot. Okay, so Nephilim, as far as physical Nephilims, we find out during the reign of David that they have all been killed off. Okay?
And they could have lied. And God couldn't have lied, but they,
Well, I mean, but that was when David got rid of the Philistines, that was the last bastion, according to the Bible, of the Anakim. All right, David and Goliath, and all that. Yeah. So it comes down to the question of how did we get Nephilim after the flood? And there's 3 different theories about that, but we'll hold off for just a moment on that.
okay.
Because I don't know if I'm going to have enough time. I don't think I will. So what we're going to talk about here is the opposite of what they talked about in the video. In the video, they said, well, all that's hyperbole. And what Heiser's going to talk about is, no, there's grammar around the Hebrew that talks about what they did from the holy war standpoint. So here we go. I hate the opening music.
Well, that's kind
What kind of instrument is that?
Let's talk a little bit about the vocabulary of the conquest. Now, again, for sure, there are certain terms associated with violence, with killing. The most important of these is karem, which is a noun, the thing devoted to destruction, and the verb is karam, again, to devote something to destruction. This is actually the language of offering or sacrifice, that when you put something under karem, it was devoted only to Yahweh. In other words, Yahweh would dictate what was done with it. It was like a sacrifice to Yahweh. And so when this vocabulary is used, basically the messaging is, if it's karem, it belongs to Yahweh and I will dictate its destiny. It belongs to no one else. And so this particular word is going to become important because it's going to be applied, again, specifically to places where when the spies went into the land and observed, they went different places, and we're told where they went back in Numbers 13 and other places, but when they go into the land, the places where they see the Anakim are, again, not coincidentally, going to be the places where God says, Haram. Okay, we have to do something total here, an annihilation of these particular people, because they are the spawn, they are raised up by other gods for your destruction, and we need to put a stop to it. Now, there are other verbs for killing too that are not karem, but the effect is the same. And again, not coincidentally, if you look all of those up and ask, well, where do those lemmas, those Hebrew terms, show up? They actually show up in the same places. Again, the killing is associated in the narrative, in the way it's written, with the places where the Anakim were spotted and where they dwell, where they're sort of infested in the area. So, it's the theological rationale of the whole thing that contextualizes what follows. Now, when we follow the narrative, this is actually what we get. Most of the action happens in the hill country. And this is where the Anakim were seen, again, in some of these other places. There are other verbs that show up in the conquest account, where Israelites are told to dispossess the people, or drive them out, or expel them. In other words, they don't have to kill them. But a lot of people are going to be killed because they want to defend their homes, they want to defend their homeland. They live in and among the Anakim. So yeah, there's a lot of collateral damage. But the way the narrative is set up, it specifically targets the giant clans, so that when you get to Joshua 11, 20 to 21, this is how the whole thing is basically summarized. I think it's worth reading. Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anav, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction, there's the Karem term, with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. This is the summary statement of the conquest. This is how the book of Joshua defines victory. There are no more Anakim in the land. Now, what's left of them, they ran off to Gath and Gaza and Ashdod, and guess what those places are? They are Philistine cities. Guess where we see giants again in the biblical story? From the Philistines, Goliath, the time of David. Not only Goliath, but Goliath and his brothers. They are eliminated in the time of David by David and his men. They are the last of the Anakim. They are the last of these people. They're the last of this bloodline, so to speak, that extends back in Israelite thinking back to Genesis 6:1 through 4. This is why these narratives are there. Continuing on in Joshua. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses. And Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments, and the land had rest from war. Again, that's the end of it. That's the end of the conquest narrative. And leading up to that, okay, here's where we're at. There's no more Anakim in the land. So again, at this point, in our own effort to summarize the content, the conquest effort, I'll say it again, from the time it begins, when they hit the border first under Moses and they send in the spies, they bring back the bad report and the people chicken out, and then they're sentenced to 40 years of wandering. From the time it begins to the time Joshua says, okay, we're done now, it begins and ends with the giant clans. I don't think that's an accident. I think it's deliberate. But I have not really come across anybody who sort of reads the passage with this in mind, observing that this is how the narrative is framed. This is why in Numbers 13:33 the point is made, these people are from the Nephilim. So it's a good example of really strange stuff, strange passages that actually matter in terms of the way the story is told and the theology that it conveys. And again, this is what I'm trying to do in Unseen Realm. We're trying to introduce you to reading the text the way an ancient Israelite would have read it.
So the word he was using when he first started, it sort of to my ears sounded like Korean, K-O-C.
Yeah.
What word is that?
That means.
Can you spell the word?
No, I have to go look at. No, I can't. It's Hebrew. No, I can barely spell English words. But what it means is total destruction, are destined to destruction, or devoted to destruction. It's right there. I'd have to get it. It should be in the book.
About
that
the
word.
Korean, whatever.
Yeah.
I see devoted to destruction on page 93. I don't see the word, but
Okay. I'll follow up with that because I don't. If I switch off to this, I'll mess up the thing.
And because I would think, just very quickly, I would think it comes, if we have the capability of knowing this, from a certain verse where that. So, and I'm looking for that address. What particular verse? Okay.
So he mentioned this verse, which is in Joshua 11, where basically he summarizes, like he said, the conquest of basically, hey, the Anakim are gone. We've gotten rid of them. They're not in the land anymore, but some of them have gone out to these lands. And that's how the book ends. That's how the conquest, I should say, ends. So this idea of reading the book of Joshua and the conquest with the idea that the purpose for the conquest was literally twofold. One is to take the land that was promised to them, the promised land, but the other was to drive out that seed of the Anakim, of the Nephilim. And that's what we're talking about. And obviously, he didn't do it. All right? Because let me just give you the points and I'll go back to that map. He was successful, but not complete. And we know that from a couple of different things. The book of Judges, they're fighting with the Philistines. Why are they fighting with the Philistines? Because the Philistines have the giants. All right? And the book of Judges is back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and the Philistines play a role. And obviously, when we get into David, they're still there because David's taking care of Goliath. So this is after the conquest. And I didn't put the color, the different colors are basically the different tribes. Okay? So this is the southern kingdom, that's the northern kingdom when we get there. That's the 10 tribes, that's the 2 tribes. But this is what, and can you see that very well? The purple there, it's a little light on the screen. That's what was promised to Abraham.
Wow.
Okay? They didn't get it.
Even almost, maybe, not even half of it.
Yeah. And so this area right up here and all the way down into here and over here, that's what was promised to Abraham. That was the borders that were promised to Abraham. This is what they sort of took during the conquest. They've never come close, even under the kings of Solomon and David. They never have come close to taking the full land that was promised to Abraham.
I know we can't really do this as far as what I'm going to say or ask or whatever, but and looking back, had they done what the Lord told them to do, things would be a whole lot different.
Well,
I'm not saying. I'm just thinking that it's a message to us, to me, that when He asks me to do something, when I know I'm not. It seems silly, but it's a war going on, but still, we're in a war.
Yeah.
So when I don't follow through with what He's asked or told me,
you don't get the full
then
blessing.
Guess what? I'm only going to be living in that partial area of the blessings He wants me to have on this earth versus all of it.
Well, it's the sort of the whole idea of what they were talking about in each one of those videos of the Bible Project, where blessing, curse, life, death, obedience, disobedience.
And again, and I'm sorry, that it makes me think of today that when we are talking to people, and if we say negative stuff to them, if we, whatever, in essence, we're almost cursing them. We need to be encouraging and blessing one another, not.
Yeah, but you got to take
giving them.
It's very true, but at the same time, where they talked about listening and love, it comes very much back to John's epistles in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, where it's he takes that listen and puts truth in there. The worst thing that we can do as Christians is say your separation with God's okay, do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Okay? Meaning, if we don't tell people the good news that, hey, no matter what you've done, no matter what your past is, you put your obedience belief into Jesus, you're not going to be perfect.
And I wasn't even thinking about the non-believers. I'm just thinking,
even us.
We're dealing with believers, so my mind hadn't even gone to that. Because I absolutely agree with you that there's scripture in the New Testament speak the truth in love. And we're told to do that. And I just, we're learning, we're reading this, we're studying this for a reason. And what happened then, there's lessons we can learn for ourselves for today. And that's what I'm constantly saying through all these different videos and stuff.
Well, I'm trying to put this in a good phrase. I was going to say what completely blew your mind, but maybe that's not right. I mean, what changed your thought or tore down beliefs or whatever? I mean, what made a difference in learning this today about?
For me?
Or anybody?
It was when you,
Today?
Yeah, or the whole thing. I mean, up to this point.
when you said that the dead Nephilim.
Oh, you're still on that one. Okay, we'll get into the
because
Warrior
it
Kings.
makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
Again, all of this is supposed to be somehow applicable to us.
Yes.
And therefore, it makes a whole lot of sense as you look back and why some things happen and why we know that we know we're in a supernatural war.
Mhm.
And it's important to understand that. I mean, that just blew my mind because I figured they're dead, they're gone, but they're not human, therefore that blew my mind, sorry.
Yeah.
Demons?
No,
Demons?
not the fact that they're demons. The fact that the demons that are attacking us, they're not all dead Nephilim, are they?
Well,
Or probably yes.
yeah. Well, that's so. Welcome to the next book, if you ever want to go there.
Okay.
The demon book. There's angels and demons. The demons goes into it a lot differently. I shouldn't say differently, goes into a lot more depth. Trust me, when I read it, my eyeballs bleed because it's so technical. But all of it ties in together with the battle that we're in today. How's that for a sort of a summary statement? Because I mean, there's so much more going on than we know.
Yeah. And you know,
Because Paul talks
why
about
the heck are we not hearing this more? Because it's important stuff.
because we're in especially today, we're in a consumer church society, meaning people come to church and we want to treat them like going to the movies, give them a good show, teach them a little Bible, and I mean that's probably a little bit brutal way to say it, but going and making disciples is not easy.
No.
Making yourself a disciple is not easy.
No.
Okay, so we have like 3 minutes.
I'm the only
You wanna-
one that answered that question.
Well-
Didn't anybody else, something blow their mind?
Well,
I
that
mean-
one was hard to beat.
I think this is awesome. I think it's fascinating. I think it explains a whole lot. That
Whenever you go and read the book of Joshua again,
I'm gonna
it'll
read it differently, yes.
it'll change you. Okay. So do you want to try to answer this question? I'm not going to play the video because the video is
Well,
10
isn't
minutes
that
long.
that's not quite what I asked, but are there giants after the floods?
Well, I just think that they were supernatural, and maybe they were in the animals, or
Yes, that's true.
Well, we know that happened.
With the
'Cause they went in the
pigs,
pigs,
where
that's true.
They took he got the demons out of the person and threw them into the pigs, and then the pigs all ran off the cliff or whatever.
Well, just to have a little bit of fun with you, and I'm not going to play the video because it's too long. One of the things that there's 3 different theories about this. One is that Noah was a Nephilim. It's not the case,
okay.
but it's not the case.
Okay.
But there is in one of the apocryphic books, meaning non-biblical books, a conversation between Noah and his wife, where Noah asked his wife, "Hey, you didn't produce Nephilim, did you?" I mean, so you got that conversation going on. So
I'm sorry, what did he ask his wife?
it said, our sons aren't Nephilims, are from the Nephilim, are they? So you got, again, a very sexual oriented.
Yeah,
Everything.
yeah.
So that's
Yeah, were
that's
you messing around on me with the big guys?
that's option number 1, and it's like no, okay, because God talked about Noah's purity and all that. Option number 2 is it wasn't a worldwide flood, and that some of the Nephilim basically survived in other places.
It wasn't a worldwide flood.
Yeah, I don't agree with that one either, but there is grammar that could support that, and that's too technical of a thing. The third is, well, wait a second. If the sons of God came down before the flood, what's stopping them from coming down again?
Anytime they want to.
What's to stop them coming back down again? I sort of play with that
I
one.
like that one better.
So
Yeah.
now, mind you, there's
Makes sense.
10-minute video that explains all that. We were not going to go through that one, but the idea here, though, in this lesson is these different divine rebellions, you call it however you want it, play through the entire arch of Scripture, and they're going to be the reason that Jesus came. And they're going to be the reason that Jesus comes again. So next week, there we go. Next week we actually start to leave the Old Testament and start to vantage our way into the New Testament, which is basically this idea of hidden in plain sight, which is talking about the coming of the Messiah. It's all hidden there in Scripture in plain sight.
Interesting.
All right, we made it. Still having fun with this?
Oh, yeah.
Not too crazy?
No, but I'm just
No, you're just thankful that God is in control.
Oh yeah. Well, it's all part of His plan. What I get is He's in a lot more control than we think.
Yeah.
Well, and the more we understand that, the
The
better
better we
we're
are off.
I mean, it's going to make our faith even stronger, and when we talk to other people, it can help us.
Oh, listen.
Talking to them, not that we're going to talk about the Nephilim or whatever, but they would not get it unless they take this class.
They may be calling the straight people if we start talking about it.
Well, the Nephilim it's an interesting. I have not read it yet, and it's a book about this big.
Oh my gosh.
And it's called the Genesis 6 conspiracy, I think. I don't know if it's called conspiracy, but it's Genesis 6. And basically, it takes the story of the Nephilim and puts it through every. Oh, I shouldn't say it. I mean, this is hyperbole. Through every conspiracy theory that's ever been made throughout human history. And points it back to the Nephilim being being in control of these, the crazy things that have happened in world history, these secret society groups and all that stuff. And
Who does this?
Gary,
Who does this kind of stuff?
the author's Gary Wayne, I think. And again, I have not read the whole thing. It's written from a scriptural standpoint. I have no idea if it's really good or not. I know it's a long read, and I just haven't gotten a chance to sit down and do it. But it's pretty cool. Oh yeah, it goes into Obama, and it goes into the bases in the military bases in the Antarctic. Oh, it's just so weird.
Oh, wow.
But again, we don't probably want to go there. We have enough problems just getting through a little book called Supernatural, which I thought was going to be easy. So,
Good session. And it absolutely requires maybe Emma closes us in prayer so that we don't just stutter as we walk out the door.
well, again, hopefully this isn't it is it feels like a hydrant or water hydrant being shoved at you with all this information, because I got to tell you, I'm glad we didn't do Unseen Realm, because I don't know how we would do it, because it gets into so much deep stuff. I'll give you one last thing. We're already past time, but they take the Nephilim as being related to the Greek mythology of Mount Olympus and all that, because of some of the grammar around it. It's very interesting. Because Tartarus comes from the Greek place where the Titans apparently went when they died. And honestly, it makes sense. Everything that happens, all the mythology, is based honestly in what God did.
Well, yeah, because they're big dudes and they like
Oh,
freak everybody out. So
anyways, Would you like to end us in prayer? Calm us all down.
Oh, dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you, we just praise you, we just honor you. We're just so happy that you are in control.
Amen.
And that we have this class, that we may learn and grow in knowledge of you and this world and all that is going on. We just thank you for Chris. We ask and thank you for being who you are and all that you do for us each and every moment. Lord, I just ask your guidance this week and the blessings to each one of us that we need as you so graciously give. And I just thank you and honor you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.